Steam has thousands of games. Some of those games turn out to be beautiful pieces of art or addicting games that you can sink hundreds of hours into. Others turn out to be horrifically bad. Delving into these libraries will leave you sifting through titles in an attempt to find something worth your time. Scams, cash grabs, even just poorly optimized projects. But if you want the real gems beneath the garbage, you're going to have to wade through the muck. That's what I'm here for. Today, I'm going to be taking another look at 10 of the worst reviewed games on Steam. I chose different projects from among the mixed, negative, and overwhelmingly negatives. If you've seen this series before, then you already know that I try to give each game on this list a fair shake. I attempt to see both the good and the bad with each title. My intention is not just to trash all of these poorly received games, but to see where they failed and maybe where they succeed. It's me, your favorite son, and today I'd like to once again talk about bad games. Did You Scared is a game developed by Akiyam. It was released on April 14th, 2022 and currently has negative review status on Steam with 10 total reviews and 10% of those reviews being positive. Akiyam has developed one other game called Assassin: The First List Beta. I wanted to check out this game as well, but after some speculation that the game included malware and was possibly a Bitcoin miner, I decided it was best to stay clear. Did You Scared is a pretty simple horror game. There is both a single player and a multiplayer mode, and because I couldn't really try the online features of the game, I'll leave my review to the solo mode. Did You Scared has 3 different maps in its campaign. In each of these maps, we have a different goal. These goals are explained to us through letters that we receive at the beginning of each mission. For example, in the first map, Mystery House, we're told that you have to go into the house. To open the door, you required the key. The key is at the stairs. You have to collect the key and go into the house. All right, simple enough. But the letter on the stairs elaborates even further. You were sent here by the church to examine the house and report back to the church whether this house was possessed or not. There are many comments about this house, so be careful and try to find out about the house and the previous living family in this house. There is a key at the main stairs. You have to pick up the key and go into the house for more information. Be aware. So if you couldn't guess based on the title of the game, Did You Scared is full of what I would assume are heavy translation issues. The game has constant misspellings, typos, and just poor grammar all around. The game also repeats itself quite a lot, often repeating goals or objectives over and over when we were already pretty clearly told what we needed to do. We already saw that with the letter on the stairs telling us the same thing that the pop-up did. A letter inside the house will tell us that we need to examine the house, collect some proof regarding the house, search the rooms and collect some information regarding the house, search every room for information. There might be a study room that is unlocked, so find the room and search the room. Be aware the house has a very bad past, so be careful. The next letter will once again tell us to search the rooms and collect some information regarding the house. This just happens all the time, leading to many, yeah, I get it moments where you just want to move on, but the game really wants you to know that you need to search the rooms. In addition to repeating things, the letters also just make a habit of spelling things out for us way too much. One of the letters tells us that we need to free the house of possession by completing a ritual, and the key in this room will unlock the kids' room, and we need to go to the kids' room to complete the ritual. Like, why not just skip all of this and have the letter outside tell us that? Also, did the church place these letters here? If they were already here, then why are we here? Why didn't they just complete the ritual? So when we read all of these repetitive letters, we eventually get to the point of the game. Our goal is to rid this house of its possession, and to complete the ritual that fulfills this, we need to gather a list of specific items, and then take those items to the grave of the soul that haunts the place. These graves are located around the house and have large swarms of colored energy particles around them. The first set of belongings that we need to find are baseball bait, teddy bear, old book, burned wood block, and wooden horns. These items are scattered around the house in different rooms, located on the floor, etc. This is one of the largest downsides to Did You Scared, is actually searching for these items. Sometimes the items are in obvious places, on a table in a room. Other times the items are just placed in the middle of the floor in a very dark room. The only light source that we have is this small lamp that we carry around. It's not very good and happens to take up most of our screen vision, so it becomes more of a nuisance than an advantage. And searching through dark rooms, combing every inch of the floor, is not my particular idea of fun. If you're going to have the player search for items, then it's probably best that you place the items in ways that make sense. Spots that players' vision is naturally drawn to. Spots that players are naturally guided to. There's an art to environment design and item placement. You can't just scatter things around a map and force players to retread every single room over and over, eventually hoping that they stumble upon the thing. This is also worsened by the fact that after we find this list of items, we realize that there are 2 other lists of items that we need to find as well, to rid other spirits of this house. A couple also died here and an old man. Even though we can stumble upon their items as we search for the other lists, we cannot pick them up until we've finished the first or second lists. This means that no matter what, we have to go back through the house at minimum 3 times to find these list items. And it's probably going to be more because the items are so damn hard to find. The other massive downside to Did You Scared is that no, I did not scared. The game isn't really scary at all, and that's just because the horror that it's going for is really cheap in general, and gets really old after about 5 minutes. As we wander the halls of the house, we'll be met with the various spirits that haunt this place. Except the spirits are literally just one demonic model that's in some sort of hospital gown. It pops up for 1 second, swipes at us, and then pops out of the world. This model reappears every time we encounter some sort of scare, and it just becomes annoying more than anything. I assume most of this game is made from store assets. I could be wrong because I couldn't find any of them on the asset store, but it's very possible I could have missed something. Also, we'll often hear children screaming in the house, and it's very clear that this screaming clip is just pulled from some YouTube video of people riding a roller coaster. The game has 2 other maps, one that's set in some sort of factory where we have to repair 2 generators, but it's much of the same, just finding items that are on a list. And the other is a Wild West ghost town, that again is much of the same. The game also performs pretty terribly, just dropping down to like 25 FPS at certain points, and then only increasing if we restart the game or go into the menus. I will give the game credit. I do enjoy the idea of a horror game surrounding a person who is sent into free different areas of possessions. You could improve the concept further by fleshing out the backstory. Maybe you're part of a secret government organization. Take some inspiration from the X-Files or something. Make the game a bit more dynamic. Don't just lock yourself down to finding items on a list, but maybe finding clues to figure out how the possession got started. Throw in some environmental storytelling, make the monsters and the spirits actually matter, and develop a better atmosphere. If you give me a paranormal X-Files horror game, I'm all there. But it doesn't really seem like this game wanted to try at all. The game was released in early access and just never left. It was updated 4 times in total, a few times in the month of release, and then once in June of 2022, and then never again beyond that. It seems like the developers just abandoned this game to move on to their Hitman clone. Did You Scared is not really worth your money or time. The most interesting things about the game are the vague concept, but that loose thread isn't enough to justify putting anything into this. Shred Remastered is a game that was developed by Asbo Interactive and was released on July 8th, 2015. It currently has mixed review status on Steam with 98 total reviews, 59% of those being positive. Asbo Interactive released one other game on Steam called Shred 2 featuring Sam Pilgrim, who I guess is some sort of mountain biking legend. I'm not exactly sure where the original Shred came from, since this one is the remastered version. I assume it was a mobile game at one point, but I couldn't quite find it. I should also note that Asbo Interactive also did the animation work for the Arch Enemy music video by Everything Everything. I had to note this because Everything Everything's Get to Heaven album is one of my favorites, and it was just such an out of left field collaboration that I never expected. Shred Remastered is a mountain biking game where the goal is to get the highest score you can on each of the courses and complete various challenges in the process to earn stars. Now, I really enjoyed this game overall. It's pretty simple for what it's worth, but it only costs $5, so it isn't exactly like the developers were asking for too much overall. Shred Remastered really harkens back to those classic Flash games of the early 2000s, just with a few new features and a bit more polish. It really feels like those simple biking games that you'd play on Crazy Monkey games back in the day. The controls are very simple. We can use one of the triggers to pedal our bike and gain speed, but this won't be the main way that we maneuver about the levels in Shred. The standard way that we can gain speed is by pumping and releasing our bike. This is done by holding down the face button on our controller when we land into a jump and then releasing it as we're leaving that jump. This will allow us to gain more speed and air, clearing some of the larger gaps. At first, I really didn't like this system and I found it really difficult to interface with. But after a while, I realized that I was just using the system wrong. Oftentimes, I would find myself launching over gaps so far that I landed in the middle of a ramp rather than at the start. This kills your speed and often doesn't allow you to get enough air to get over the next gap. But this can be remedied by holding the pump button before you fly over the start of the ramp. This causes your biker to push down on the bike and causing you to fall downward at an accelerated speed. This allows you to specifically hit the areas of the ramp that you'd like to and maintain your speed overall. This little system, which I should point out is not very complex at all, results in a very good flow. You end up getting in touch with the game and you feel yourself riding the fluid waves of these mountain bike trails. This only comes once you get the hang of the system though, and at the beginning, it can be a little rough. The game gets a little more complex once we add in tricks to our arsenal. While in the air, we can pull off a variety of different moves. Pressing the right thumbstick in any direction will allow us to hold a different trick, a can-can, a Superman, or a 360. The left stick allows us to balance and orient ourselves in the air. We can also use this to perform backflips or front flips. These can be combined with normal tricks to pull off insane stunts in the air. We can also hold these tricks for a few seconds to tweak them, which gives us a large score multiplier. Each level has 5 different challenges to complete, each that will give us a star for nailing them. Gaining a certain amount of stars will unlock the next level. These challenges can be something simple like doing a certain amount of a particular trick, or something difficult like combining tricks with backflips over specific gaps. The game isn't all perfect. It does have its fair share of downsides. The main one is that each level didn't really feel intuitive on first run through. It felt like you often had to try the level a few times to actually get a feel for it. This means that you almost have to learn a level before you can actually progress, which can leave you feeling frustrated at missing gaps or tricks. It's not the worst thing ever, but it is an area that could be improved upon. And maybe that's what the sequel did, I'm not sure. The game's initial rating also seems to come from a fair amount of bugs that people reported running into. These mostly seem to be fixed at this point. I didn't encounter a single bug while I was playing the game, and it seems like the rating mostly came from those technical issues rather than design or gameplay problems. Shred was actually pretty fun to play overall. It's one of the only games featured in this series that I would actually recommend checking out. It's perfect if you just want some simple mountain BMX fun. It's nothing that's going to take hundreds of hours from you, and it isn't going to shock you with its complexity, but it's certainly a good time for the low price that you're paying. Overlord Fellowship of Evil was developed by Codemasters and was released on October 19th, 2015. It currently has mostly negative review status on Steam, with 544 total reviews, only 21% of those being positive. Fellowship of Evil is actually the 5th game in the Overlord franchise that started in 2007. The original game saw you as a resurrected Dark Lord who controlled and amassed a host of minions to wreak havoc and spread evil on the realms around him. A sequel to this game was released in 2009, and 2 spin-off games, Dark Legend for the Wii and Minions for the DS. Fellowship of Evil was the final game in the series and changed the game from a single-player over-the-shoulder action game to a multiplayer isometric action RPG. The game sees us playing one of 4 characters that were killed and resurrected to become the new Dark Lord of this domain, replacing the old one from the previous games. Our goal is similar: gain more minions and spread evil across the lands. We do this by playing different missions where we run through areas, killing different enemies, gaining new loot, and completing different objectives. There's a lot of problems with Fellowship of Evil, and a lot of reasons that it doesn't appeal to the fan base of the original Overlord games. The first is that the combat for this game is just not very good. The game allows us to use light and heavy attacks, both of which are different for every character in the game. They also each have their own special attacks, which can be anything from a whirlwind of axes to a giant fiery scythe. We have 4 different types of minions, each with their own roles to fill in combat and with their own uses in puzzles outside of combat. The brown minions will do basic physical damage and attack enemies, the red minions will explode upon contact with an enemy, the green minions will teleport behind an enemy and backstab them, and the blue minions will heal our character. These minions are a big part of combat, but honestly aren't that integral to killing enemies. A lot of the damage that we do will be coming from our main character. The main problem with this is that the game just doesn't control that well. We can't get a ton of accurate inputs, which causes a huge problem. Some of the characters feel incredibly underpowered, making playing this game solo almost impossible, and the whole thing just doesn't feel that satisfying. A lot of the enemies are damage sponges, so we just end up swinging for a really long time, waiting for their health bar to dwindle down. The game both wants to be a challenging ARPG where our inputs, dodges, and blocks really matter, but also kind of a horde swarm ARPG where we're just cutting down big groups of enemies with ease. And while our minions do help us in combat, they aren't swarming the enemy and doing most of the killing for us like the original game did. I played the original Overlord a lot on the PS3 when it first came out, and I revisited it for this video. The game is actually really fun, albeit with problems of its own. One of the best things about that game was amassing a horde of minions and just having them totally wipe out a huge group of enemies. You don't even have to swing your sword if you don't want to. You can just stand back and watch the goons fall. It's very satisfying, and of course, at times, it helps if you get involved yourself, but the minions are doing the heavy lifting for you. Fellowship of Evil just doesn't have this feeling, and with the character combat now being the star of the show, it just isn't good enough to take up realty. The other place that Fellowship of Evil is massively lacking is that it doesn't have the same feeling of building up your base. In Overlord, as you complete quests throughout the world, you will eventually find pieces of equipment that help you start to rebuild your homestead and develop your kingdom of evil. You slowly get to see how the environment changes and grows, along with the things that you unlock as the game progresses. Fellowship of Evil doesn't really have this, at least not as strong as the first game did. We will unlock new functionality like upgrading our weapons or our minions as the game progresses, but it isn't nearly as satisfying of an implementation as Overlord. And that's mostly where Fellowship of Evil fails across the board. It just doesn't have any of that charm or satisfaction that the first game did. And of course, as you can tell from just looking at the 2 games, it doesn't really feel like it's targeting nearly the same audience. This is also a case of the original developer being completely gone from the series. Triumph Studios actually developed the first 2 games in the series, and they were both published by Codemasters. Codemasters ended up developing and publishing Fellowship of Evil, so this seems like just a very large disconnect with what made the original games so interesting in the first place. And even when you look at Fellowship of Evil as a game divorced from the series that it's a part of, it still doesn't stand up. It isn't a great ARPG on its own. It has poor controls, weak systems, unsatisfying gameplay, a bland story, and puzzles which leave a lot to be desired. There's just really nothing here worth sticking around for, and on top of that, it's a part of a series that just doesn't really fit in too well. Elrentaros Wanderings was developed by Hakama and was released on August 22nd, 2024. It currently has negative review status on Steam with 11 total reviews and 18% of the reviews being positive. Hakama is actually known for developing some of the most recent games in the Rune Factory series. This game was actually called Rear Sakai when it was first released in Japan, but was eventually brought to the West as Elrentaros Wanderings. The game is a pretty simple dungeon crawler with a light bond system that progresses us through the game. Our main character is a boy who seems to have lost his memories and found himself in a fantasy world. Here, dungeons appear on the outskirts of town, and these dungeons are treacherous places, waiting for treasure hunters to search through their depths. The light dungeons are dangerous but can be traversed pretty simply. The arc dungeons are far more dangerous and can't even be explored unless you're powerful enough to find their mysterious entrances. The main story surrounds our main character finding a mysterious mirror and trying to delve these dungeons to repair said mirror and find the gems that are meant to be slotted around the edges of it. The story itself is one of the game's biggest weak points, of which there are a lot. It's just overall pretty bland. During the first couple hours of the game, it introduces way too many characters all at once. It's just throwing people at you one after the other, and sure, some of them are side characters that aren't particularly integral to the overall plot, but it's just overwhelming. The pacing here is way off. The characters themselves aren't that interesting. They all sort of have one thing, and that thing happens to be where their character begins and ends. There's really not a ton there past that, and it's a shame because the systems around the game are all rooted in these characters. The characters are the pillars that the gameplay rests on. In Elrentaros Wanderings, the bulk of our combat is delving into the dungeons in the surrounding areas. The loop of the game looks like this. We head into a dungeon, beat 10 short areas, defeat a boss, and then head back to town for the night. We equip any new or better gear that we got from our run and then do it all over again the next day. In each of these dungeons, there are challenges that we can complete. These challenges can be simple things like completing the run without dying, or more difficult objectives like not getting hit by any projectiles. The reward for these challenges can either be regular gear that we can equip, or it can be bond items that we can give to characters in town. These bond items allow us to become closer with the characters, increasing our likability to them. It also furthers their story, which develops them further as a character. Elrentaros Wanderings has a lot of very light inspiration from the Persona series, whether it's the social link-like system that it has going for it, or the time of day system, or the fact that at night our character dreams about being in a high school setting. There's definitely some inspiration from that series coming through here. But the problem is that the substance that those systems have in their original place is all gone here. The night and day cycle doesn't really matter in this game, the bond stories aren't strong enough to enable us to continue, and the high school setting at night is hinting at the larger story overall. The dungeon system really tends to lack as well. Each dungeon has higher level versions of itself that we will unlock as we progress through the story. Completing the higher levels will net us better rewards and provide us with different challenges so that we can get more bond items or even better gear. The goal is to get better gear so we can clear higher level dungeons, but usually we can't complete a higher level dungeon until we've done the first level at least a few times. This makes the game really grindy overall. We just have to repeat these lower levels over and over again until we get strong enough to proceed. Also, the dungeon challenges are designed horribly. There are particular ones that require you to not get hit by a specific enemy, or not get hit in a specific level of the dungeon. This means that if you fail that challenge halfway through the dungeon, you have to start over entirely and complete it once more. This is just tedious design overall, and in my opinion, is meant to get more playtime out of the player, rather than having them thoroughly engaged with the systems the game presents. and combat overall is just pretty bland. We basically hold the X button to attack over and over. We can equip healing potions and a few other abilities in the other slots of our hotbar, but dodging isn't as important as just having the ability to tank through everything in this level. The game is designed around your stats being high enough, not necessarily your skill. And if you manage to beat a dungeon when you're at a lower level, then the gear you receive might not be enough to increase your level for the next challenge, so you're left grinding again. And overall, the game is just far too expensive for what it is. Elrentaros Wanderings costs $45, so you would be expecting some level of depth here, a decent RPG and a good story. But you don't really get any of that for this high of a price point. In return, you get something that's only slightly deeper than a mobile game. The only thing I really did like in the game was the awakening system. Each piece of gear has awakening stats. You can pay money to awaken different modifiers on the gear, and there's a limited amount of slots that each piece of gear has, so you have to choose between stats. This allows for a lot more variety and choice when it comes to gameplay. This part of the system was interesting, but that alone isn't enough to support Elrentaros Wanderings. The rest of the game is pretty bland and frustrating, and just really isn't worth your time or money. Turte is a game developed by Turte. It's their only game on Steam and was released on July 28th, 2024. It currently has negative review status on Steam with 18 total reviews, 11% of them being positive. Turte is a game that I will refer to as an egg-like. This term was coined by Harvey Randall in a PC Gamer article about the banana game. Now, Turte isn't really the point of this section. It is a negatively reviewed Steam game, but I'm using this game to talk about a larger problem that Steam has with this genre of games. Turte and games like it are based on the game called Egg. It was developed by Colbacino Games and features just a simple egg that you can click on. The game itself wasn't very popular, but a game that would take inspiration from it was. Banana was released on April 23rd, 2024, and released to massive popularity. The game actually had one of the best all-time peak players in Steam history, hitting 890,000 people using it in June of 2024. Now, why was this free game so incredibly popular? Well, in this genre of games, you don't really play the game. Yes, you can click this banana or this egg or this turtle if you'd like, but you don't really need to. The allure of these games is that they provide you with free Steam drops a couple times a day, depending on the game. These Steam drops are usually skins for whatever you're clicking in the game. In the case of Banana, they are different banana skins that you can equip. These skins are usually also sold by the developer themselves, and you can buy them at different intervals, most of them being limited to increase the exclusivity of the product. Now, I know you have a lot of questions, because I sure did when I started researching this topic. So first off, why would people buy these skins in the first place? Well, as you probably already guessed, no one is actually using these skins. You can sell these skins on the Steam marketplace, most of which are sold for around 3 cents. So that means that you can leave this game running, click it a few times a day so that the game thinks you're still using it, and get free banana skins that you can hopefully sell for a few cents on the marketplace. The minimum price to sell something like this on Steam is 3 cents, because Steam and the developer need to take their cut. The developer gets 1 cent when this item is sold, and so does Steam. And this extends to selling your item to another user as well. This isn't just when you buy the skins from them, but we'll get back to that in a second. Most of the reason that I believe people buy these skins or even play this game is that they think they can make some money from it. Being a young kid on the internet, I remember trying all kinds of dumb shit because I thought I could make some money. An easy way to get extra cash to buy more video games? I was already signed up. Most of these turned out to be scams, or they just don't work. Banana is probably the same. If you can even sell these skins, then maybe you're making a few cents a day, but it certainly isn't worth your time. Some people might buy the skins from the store because they think these things will rise in price eventually. I found one skin that sold for $500 and a couple that sold for $100 or so, but that was literally less than 10 out of millions of these things. So the odds that you're going to get that incredibly low drop rate skin or find the one that no one else thinks will be worth it is pretty low. The last reason that people might buy these are just bots. I would wager to guess that most of the transactions happening with the banana skin market at this point are probably bots buying these low and trying to sell them high, or just farming some kind of account rep like they do with CSGO skins. But I think for the most part, this game probably targets kids who are trying to get some extra money and think they'll eventually hit it big. Hell, they might have even convinced mom or dad to buy them a few because they just know they'll be worth something someday. I was interested in how successful this game actually was though, because at the end of the day, it's free. How much money could they really be making? I've seen a few websites try to calculate this number just by taking the player count on any given day and assuming that they all sold 2 items, but that seems pretty inaccurate. I decided to take the most popular item, their plain banana skin, and see how many times it was sold in a week. I did this by checking the amount of items sold from the median sales price chart and then multiplying that by the 1 cent that the developer would receive for each sale. Now, if I did my numbers correctly, it seems like in the last week, this banana was sold around 9 million times, which, if multiplied by 1 cent, means that the developer and Steam have made $90,000 in just a week. Now, let's assume that this chart doesn't actually show how many items were sold. Maybe it just shows how many were listed for sale, or maybe my numbers were off somewhere. Even if it's only 10% of what I listed, that's still $9,000 per week, which is almost $500,000 per year, and that's just one item. That doesn't account for the items sold directly by the developer or the hundreds of other drops that are sold daily. Any way that you shake it, these guys are making a ton of money. And there's also some evidence that the developers have done a previous Steam scam with another game that did a similar thing. They were giving free Steam drops and then artificially inflating the price before selling off their personal stock, just like a pump and dump scam in crypto. There's a better video on this subject by YouTuber John that goes a bit more in depth than I could here, but it's certainly an interesting situation. The real problem, though, honestly, isn't Banana itself, but the hundreds of games cropping up in its success, trying to recreate what that game started. Games like Watermelon, Banana Cat, Tomato and Banana, and Turte are all the same. They're quickly developed, shoddy games that don't require you to do anything but wait for drops in the promise that you're going to be making some bank someday. Most of these games are incredibly low-effort cash grabs. They're just trying to work off the trend that's popular right now and creating slop in the meantime. There's really nothing redeemable here or any sort of silver lining, it's just garbage. Art of Murder: The Secret Files is a game developed by City Interactive SA and was released on February 27, 2009. It currently has very negative review status on Steam with 70 total reviews, 14% of those being positive. Art of Murder is a hidden object puzzle game that puts us in the shoes of Nicole Bonet, a detective that's looking to uncover the mystery behind a murder and kidnapping of a special agent. The Secret Files is actually part of the Art of Murder series that started in 2008 with Art of Murder: FBI Confidential. The previous games in the series were more focused on puzzles, combining items, and general adventure game elements. They were overall more point-and-click games than they were hidden object games. But The Secret Files goes in the other direction with this entry. It turns the game entirely into a hidden object style adventure. Our goal is to find a secret agent that was kidnapped after another person was murdered. Sometimes we will have to investigate crime scenes, look for clues, and solve puzzles, but most of the game's runtime is taken up by finding little objects that are hidden around an image. Now, I'll just say up front, I've never really understood the appeal of a hidden object game in general. These games were sort of popular for a very short period in the 2000s, but I never really understood why people liked them. I guess at the end of the day, they're simple and relatively easy to make. I could see a game like this being enjoyable if it was a means to get to a larger narrative, if finding the objects was just a short hurdle that you had to get through so that you could get to the interesting story of the game. But the Secret Files doesn't have that at all. The story that we do get in between puzzles is really short. It's usually just a couple lines of pretty poorly written dialogue before we can move on. Nothing that really shakes up what we already thought of the tale so far. Nothing groundbreaking, just, wow, it looks like the murder victim was murdered. Let's go somewhere else. In a lot of the reviews that I read, there seem to be complaints about how difficult the hidden object portion of the game was. I didn't really agree with this. If anything, I thought the game was far too easy. In each hidden object area, we will have a list of items that we have to find within a picture above that list. These items are all neatly tucked away in the area, often slightly blending them in with other items so that we have to look hard to find them. I always found these things pretty easy because the objects that we have to find are usually sticking out like a sore thumb. This is because they're separate objects to the background picture, so you can usually tell where they're at right away without even looking at the list. The game also gives us a clock at the bottom right of the screen, and every minute or so, we can use this power to have it find one item for us. We can also find clocks in the picture to get extra charges of this power, making things even easier. Outside of the hidden object game, there are a few scattered puzzles here and there, but they really are so simple that I don't even really count them as puzzles. It's the same puzzles that you see in every game. Match the wires, find the safe combo, etc. It's nothing special, and they really don't add much to the game overall. I think as a whole, The Secret Files really fails as both an adventure game and as a hidden object game. There just isn't a lot here that redeems it in either of these genres. I don't mind a good adventure game, or even a good point-and-click game, but if there's not reward for solving the puzzles, then what are we really here for? In my opinion, it seems like the developers found a cheaper way to make these games as the series continued, and decided to pivot to that instead of their previous template. My Museum Treasure Hunter is a game developed by Many Dev Studio and Codemeister. It was released on June 25th, 2024, and currently has negative review status on Steam, with 26 total reviews, 19% of those being positive. The game is in the simulator genre and sees us running our very own museum where we can place exhibits. We can also head out on expeditions and find new relics to showcase, restoring them when we bring them back to our place. Now, I want to say that My Museum actually has a pretty good premise overall. Simulator games are a huge guilty pleasure of mine. A really good simulator game can be addicting and engaging enough to cause you to spend dozens of hours on its gameplay loop, and satisfying gameplay certainly lends to this as well. If your project has really satisfying gameplay, then players are far more likely to spend a lot of their time with it. My Museum has many problems in each of these areas. The goal of the game is to build up our museum with relics or to sell them online. We can do this by heading into undiscovered tombs and lands through expeditions. We can then bring relics back to restore them and put them in our displays or post them online. Now, the restoration aspect of this game can be really satisfying. Using the brush and the air gun to blow debris off of these ancient items is pretty satisfying. And I really like the fact that each of these items have descriptions that tell you about their history and what they were used for. It adds another layer of information to the game, learning about the item after you get it. But the restoration system is really clunky. The brush will often get caught on the item if you move it too fast. Sometimes you won't be able to angle the camera properly to see the item you're restoring. It's just a really messy implementation of this system, and this extends to just about everything in the game. Trying to move exhibits around doesn't feel good. Accessing our inventory or any of the menus means having to deal with this horrid, unintuitive wheel system that makes absolutely no sense. Even collecting stuff is just sometimes wonky and barely works. Half the game honestly just feels like we're fighting with it just to play. And the game barely explains things to you. At one point, we just show up in another museum and have to put down exhibits, and we can only do it in the top hall or something. And after this little section, we're just teleported back to our museum without any explanation. I also could never really figure out how to place new exhibits in my museum. It just really isn't clear at all. Some of the exhibits wouldn't even let me place relics inside of them. When we do head out on expeditions, we crawl different tombs and solve puzzles to access the treasure that's hidden underneath. This suffers from a lot of the same issues, the game just being really hard to interface with. The puzzles are also extremely simple and don't have any sort of challenge at all, making these sections just kind of feel like we're on autopilot. And again, I want to say I think this is a really good idea for a simulator game. Heading out on short little expeditions to find lost relics, bringing them back to your museum, fixing them up, and then showcasing them to the world would all work super well within this genre. Trying to use these relics to get your rating up and increasing the amount of people that come into your museum to generate better profits could be really cool. But the idea is kind of wasted on this game because the implementation just really isn't there. The game isn't in early access either, it's fully released. It was last updated at the beginning of July, shortly after its release, but it hasn't been updated since then. It's not quite long enough for me to say that it's fully abandoned, but it's been long enough to warrant some questions. At the end of the day, my museum has a great idea with a ton of really poor execution, which makes it not really worth it in the end. The Battle of Sacred Heart is a game that was developed by 40RS. It was released on August 2nd, 2024, and currently has negative review status on Steam, with 10 total reviews, 10% of those being positive. The Battle of Sacred Heart is an action RPG game that sees us playing a member of a mystery church whose goal is to challenge the elite of the four armies of Middle-earth. So I guess this game is canon in the Tolkien universe. This must be part of the Silmarillion or something because I don't remember this. The game sees us fighting waves of enemies in a standard medieval battle arena. There really is no story to this game, so let's just take a look at the combat system. In the game, we can left-click to light attack and right-click to heavy attack. Middle mouse button will lock onto enemies, Alt will dash, space will dodge, and Shift will block. We can change our weapon with the C key, and our 4 number buttons will allow us to use a variety of skills. These skills are chosen at the beginning of the run. If we die during a run, then we restart all the way from the beginning. The goal is to get through as many waves as possible, simple as that. When we begin a run, we can pick 4 special arts. 2 of these are Demon Axe special arts, and the other 2 are God Spear special arts. Now, I'm gonna be honest, I have no fucking clue how to use these. I tried quite a few times in the game. From what I saw, you're supposed to click specific buttons when an enemy's shield breaks to use these attacks, but it just never worked for me. This is actually what the green bar below our stamina is supposed to be. I know, blue bar for stamina. What the fuck, right? But I saw some reviews and discussion posts asking what this even was because it was never used. So I'm not sure if I was doing something wrong or if the game was just broken. After we pick our special arts, we can then choose 4 skills to put in our hotbars. We can choose a healing skill, a shield skill, a damage buff skill, a fireball skill, a freeze column skill, or a lightning bolt skill. All of these skills can be leveled up and will change as they are upgraded. The resource that we level up these skills with is called souls. Souls are gained from killing enemies, and every few waves we will be pitted against a boss, and we can then upgrade and change out our skills again. The biggest problem with this is that our souls are also our resource for using the skills in the first place. This is probably the biggest issue that the Battle of Sacred Heart has. If we want to advance, if we want to keep getting through the waves, then we need to save these souls, because these souls can also be traded in for another currency which increases our base stats. These souls are incredibly useful in leveling up and ensuring that we can get further and further. We need better stats to get farther in the waves, and we need better skills to get higher ranks, but we need to be able to use those skills. We can't do both, because if we use too many skills, then we don't have souls to upgrade those skills. And if we don't use those skills, then we won't be able to progress, and even if we upgrade the skills, then what the fucking is the point of all of it? This system just doesn't work at all. You can't realistically balance either of these things out with each other. We can also hire out characters to join us in our wave fighting adventures. There are 4 allies that can be equipped who will help us out in battle. These AI allies basically just take some of the load off of us, ensuring that we can last longer in the arena. There's also a really strange prayer mechanic in this game. So the bubble at the top right of the screen represents our sin meter. The more we kill, the more we sin. And if this meter fills, then we've sinned too much and we must pray. A prayer statue will then drop down on the map somewhere, and we have to find it and pray by holding down a button. If we don't do this in a certain amount of time, then we receive divine punishment, which is us basically being attacked by the gods. If we do manage to pray in time, then we get a reward from a chest that spawns. This is usually a temporary item that powers us up. This can be a set of dual katanas or just a straight up shotgun. Now, the reason this doesn't work very well is because we can't effectively pray during battle. If this statue plops down while we're cutting down enemies, then we don't have enough time to stand at it for a few seconds because we can get clapped while we're trying to pray. But we also don't have time in between waves because there's a large wave screen that comes up during the downtime and it takes forever to go away. There's really just no good way to resolve this, and it's effectively the only source of reward that we get in general. There's also my blanket criticism that this game just controls really poorly. It's trying really hard to be some sort of Souls-like in its combat style. Enemies hit pretty hard, we often need to dodge or parry attacks, but none of the systems in the game really justify that. Our character moves incredibly slow, and there just isn't enough precision here to justify the amount of difficulty. Our character even takes forever to turn, which gets in the way of us effectively using our arsenal of moves in a pinch. If we're caught with our back turned, then it's basically over. The game isn't crazy hard or anything, it's just hard to interface with. And all of this really creates a damning picture of this game because none of it really meshes together at all. This whole thing just feels like this weird amalgamation of a ton of different systems, this strange hodgepodge of different ideas all pushed into one. None of it really matches up or works well. Also, not to brag, but I'm number 5 overall ranked in the world, just saying. In the end, the Battle of the Sacred Heart really has no idea what it wants to be. It's going in so many directions at once and doesn't really excel at any of them. It's a huge mess and just doesn't warrant the time that you'd have to put in to deal with it. Lost in Tropics is a game developed by Lucas Game Labs and was released on May 22nd, 2024. It currently has negative review status on Steam with 17 total reviews, 17% of those reviews being positive. Lost in Tropics is a pretty basic survival game at its core. We have to survive on an island with a companion for as long as possible. This means keeping both of us satiated and not letting the elements get to us. The game features the classic survival elements that we see in just about every other game in this genre. We first have an overall health meter, which represents the general state of our physical being. Getting hit or taking damage from any of the other meters will bring this down. Our mental state is measured as well. I'm not entirely sure what affects this, but I would assume getting infection or being low energy will send it plummeting. Then, of course, we have our thirst meter. This can be filled by drinking water that we collect from a rain collector, or by drinking the coconuts from the nearby trees. Our hunger meter can be filled mostly by killing the crabs on the island. This is pretty easy because we can fashion throwing sticks from the trees around our camp. These sticks don't even really need to be fashioned. If we just cut a tree down, they appear. And finally, our energy will increase if we sleep and goes down throughout the day. We also have a temperature meter that will increase on hot days and will force us to find shade or take a dip in the water to lower it. Our goal is to collect resources and to fortify our camp so that we can endure the harsh island life. Building is not done by us though, it's done by our companion that we're on the island with. We can give resources to this companion and then order them to build structures. They can also go searching for resources as well, as long as we tell them to do so. There really doesn't seem to be much here to build, honestly, and the game doesn't get too complex outside of this. You kind of experience everything there is to find after the first couple days, and then you're just left to see how long you can last before you die. Now, there's something really weird about Lost in Tropics. If my guess is right, it seems like there was originally a game show element to this game. There are a few tooltips in the game about getting a better score in the game or with the audience. Also, when we pick the character that we play at the beginning, they all have different survival scores, which look very similar to the scores that you see on shows like Naked and Afraid. If I had to make a guess, I would say that this was the original intention of the game, but they just never really fleshed it out and just left what they had started in the game. I say this because the game never really says that you're on a show or playing a game or anything like that. It isn't in the description on the Steam page at all. I could be wrong, but if this was the case, then I would much rather see that than just another bland survival game. Literally no one is going to play a survival game that has absolutely nothing special about it, especially in 2024. People might play it if you introduce a new mechanic like pleasing an audience or doing something interesting. Maybe you're sort of forced to do riskier things because the audience finds it more interesting. These riskier events could cause you to get hurt and you risk losing health, but it could be worth it to get the audience on your side. Maybe they could send you loot if they like you enough or something. It's an idea, but I think you need something to spice up the formula when the survival genre is about as dry as a well can get at this point. Really, the only new thing here is the idea of a companion, but our companion doesn't really do that much. They just sit there, and even getting them to collect resources is often slower than if we just did it ourselves. We also have to cook everything that we eat by holding the food over a fire, which is just about as tedious as it could possibly be. We also need to physically drag our inventory to either give it to our companion or to eat for ourselves. You would think that a survival game released in 2024 would at least have some quality of life and learn from some of the mistakes of other games in the genre. But Lost in Tropics hasn't really seemed to learn much of anything. It doesn't really do anything new, it doesn't really do anything well, it doesn't look great, its sound design is meh, its gameplay is boring and one-dimensional. Lost in Tropics' biggest crime is just being nothing at all. School Owner is a game that was developed by Owner Games and was released on February 3rd, 2024. It currently has mostly negative review status on Steam with 53 total reviews, 22% of those being positive. School Owner is a classic game that sees us simulating managing an educational facility. We get to be the one overseeing the operations at a school, and it's our job to upgrade and build our way to teaching the next generation. I'll just be honest, School Owner is a huge fucking mess. It reminds me quite a lot of that mega fast food game that I reviewed in one of my previous videos. It's so incredibly frustrating to work around. When I started the game, I followed the tutorial, making my way through each of the steps so that I could get to the more open part of the game. I built an office, put some objects in it, built an admissions office, filled that room as well, built some solar panels, and pretty soon it was time to start taking admissions. But all of a sudden, the construction workers were having issues finishing the buildings I had set up. Even though there were doors on the rooms, they couldn't make it in and were just stuck on the outside. I eventually decided to restart the game, and that worked for a second, but it started happening again. It took me a long time of fiddling with the game, but I eventually started a new save and found out that you have to build the rooms and let them be finished before you place objects inside. If you put objects in first, then it triggers a bug and the workers just freak out, unable to finish what they were working on. A simple bug, but I could work around it. At this point, I had to open the school to applications, but I couldn't accept any applications. No one was applying to my school, even though it was open. I ended up going to the discussions page on Steam to find that this was the last thing posted in the boards. Same here. I built the headmaster's office, admin office, but can't get students after I open the school. I just go bankrupt and can't get past this. How do I get around this issue? Also, I cannot open the bank for a loan. The developer responded, so I hoped that this would have been some sort of solution that I was missing. You need to hire an accountant and make sure that the office for the accountant is fully built before you can take out loans. Yeah, that's not what he... Never mind. It looks like I was going to have to figure it out myself. I messed with the game some more, and eventually students just started showing up. I have no idea how it happened because it took a while, but eventually it just worked, so I was grateful for that. This was the very brief period where the game actually seemed to be working properly for a minute. It wasn't exactly good, but it was working somewhat. I was completing the tutorial to-do list, building offices, building classrooms, etc. I eventually built a staff room, an accountant's office, a kitchen, bathrooms. I was certainly getting there, and then the game just broke. I think I accidentally built one of the rooms wrong and it wouldn't let me proceed. My whole point here is that School Owner is just so damn broken. It's a game that's definitely still in early access, but it was already taken out of early access. It clearly was not ready for a 1.0 release, or hell, even a 2.0 release, but it was put out there anyways. It needs a lot more time to cook because right now it's just a barely functional project. And it's a shame because from what I can see, there are plenty of really interesting details here. The game actually seems to feature a schedule that lets you adjust class times and organize the calendar. You can even adjust the classes and their syllabus. This level of detail would be really interesting in a game like this, and allowing your players to have this type of control without overwhelming them is really the balance that you want to strike with this genre. But if the game around it just doesn't work, how the hell do you expect people to play it? The game's 2.2.0 update released in July of 2020, and then it was never updated again. Their next update was supposed to be the 3.0 release, which was expected in May of 2020, but was never released. School Owner has some really interesting ideas and systems, but they are systems that you will never see or interface with because by then you will have broken the game and won't be able to fix it. With that, we've taken a look at another 10 of the worst reviewed games on Steam. If you have any suggestions for terrible Steam games that I should play next, be sure to leave them in the comments. I'm always on the lookout for some poorly received games, and especially include them if you think their negative rating isn't deserved. As always, a big thank you to my patrons. You guys are my #1 supporters, and I really appreciate it. If you aren't supporting me over on Patreon, consider checking it out. I offer early access to my videos and some extra content and updates here and there. Until next time, bye now.